Welcome to Joy Meets World. I'm your host, Joy Yuki, and on this podcast, I'm taking you through my travels across the U.S. to visit all of the national parks with my dog Quincy. Today, I will be telling you about my trip to and my travels in Redwood National Park. We left off in Susanville, California, which is in the northeast side of California in the Sierra Nevadas. I was visiting Lassen Volcanic National Park. I drove from Susanville to the west coast of California, almost straight west to a little town called Trinidad, which is right on the coast. It was a 5-hour drive, about 260 miles. So quite a leg, but a pretty straightforward, easy journey. It was through the mountains, so there was a lot of different speed limits. So it was, you had to stay more alert, I think, than if you were just driving on a highway straight through 5 hours. Trinidad is 20 minutes from the park entrance, the entrance to Redwood National Park. It's actually a national and state park. So the state of California and the federal government have partnered on this to reserve all of this land. It's almost 132,000 acres of redwoods that they've set aside in a partnership. Unlike some of the other parks, there's no actual entrance station, and this park is open 24/7. There are visitor centers, but you don't have to pay a fee. You don't have to show your parks pass. You really just access different trails from the main highway, and they kind of shoot off. So that's a little bit different. It's really nice, though, of course, when you don't have to, stop and pay a fee, or there's not a limited number of visitors that are allowed. It's just kind of open and ready when you are. So I stayed in Trinidad in a renovated Airstream trailer, and they did a really good job fixing it up. It was really neat to stay in an Airstream. I'd never seen one in person or been in one in person. They had a regular-sized queen bed in there, which was really nice. They had central heating, which was really nice because it was cold and rainy. It was situated right in the middle of the redwoods, so not technically in Redwood National or State Parks, but we were in the middle of a redwood forest, which was beautiful. And it rained / misted the whole time, which is what you would typically think of the Pacific Northwest. It's right across practically the border from Oregon. So that type of weather. And normally I'm not a rain and clouds type of person. I really like my sunshine and my warm weather, but this was so welcome to have this weather because I have not seen rain or clouds for 2 months. So when I started my trip, I started in Arkansas, and that week that I was in Arkansas, the first week of January, there was rain and a little bit of snow. But from that second week of January on, it was sun and blue sky the entire time. And I had not seen hardly a cloud in the sky, definitely no rain until that point, which was the first week of March. So that's a long time to not go without rain, and I have a definite appreciation for what Californians go through, kind of waiting for that rain and going through droughts and, understanding just the gravity of not getting rain and how that can affect, forest fires and just how aware you are of the lack of precipitation, the lack of wetness, and the lack of rain. So I was excited to see rain, all that to say. Trinidad was right on the Pacific coast, so as you're driving, anywhere around there, you see the ocean to your left, and it was frothy and violent, but it looked awesome. it was just an amazing, amazing view. What you would typically think of a West Coast, Pacific Northwest coast ocean is what I saw, which was just amazing, and I loved it. I think the only part that I did not love about the Airstream trailer was the tiny little bathroom. And obviously that's a part of camping life and a camper, which I was prepared for, but now I know I'm not really, that's not my favorite place to stay. So of course the shower's tiny, and I'm about a foot taller than the shower head, and so it was difficult to take a shower. And then it's, a camper toilet, and this one, the septic was not, working correctly. So there were just some things with that I was not a fan of. Not a camping person, but if you are, that's a great Airbnb to stay in for a really long time. And otherwise, it was great. It was just really homey and really nice. But enough about the Airbnb. I want to tell you about the park and what I got to do in the park. So the Redwood National Park was started in 1968, and it was set aside as protection from loggers that almost completely wiped it out. So the whole coast used to be covered in redwoods, and then during the gold rush, really, settlers came. They pushed out all the Native Americans, pretty much devastated that population, and then also started just logging the redwoods like crazy. They actually, up until 1968, 96% of old growth redwoods had been logged. So there's only 4% of old growth redwoods still around in the rest of the parts of California where the trees have been preserved. And old growth just means these trees could be about 2,000 years old. They believe that some of the oldest redwoods in the area are 2,000 years old, which is crazy to think about, that they have been here that long. 2,000 years. Think about what happened 2,000 years ago, and that these trees have been there since then. Some of the new growth ones are 300 to 700 years old, which is still really old to think about. So it's really sad that a lot of these trees have gone, but there was a big fight in the 60s between the logging companies and the government about preserving these areas. Obviously, the logging companies, would lose a lot of money because they can't cut down these beautiful trees and sell them. But we would have lost these trees forever if we hadn't preserved them. So that's kind of why we have the Redwoods National and State Parks in California. I was able to hike a 10-mile trail, so it's 5 miles one way, you turn around, come back 5 miles, so 10 miles altogether. It was a pretty, honestly, an easy hike. I mean, obviously some ups and downs in elevation, but really not bad at all. Like if you're a beginner hiker and just want to have a leisurely hike all day, perfect trail. Really, you're never out of breath either way, and just so much to see. So the trail that we took was the James Urban Trail to the Fern Canyon, and a friend of a friend who lives in California was able to hike with me, which was really fun because I have not had, anyone to do hikes with the past 2 months. So Chris came up from Oakland and hiked with me, and it was really fun to have a buddy on the trail. So thanks for the intro. Shout out to my friends Jen and Rob for connecting us. So the trail started off of, really, it was just a turn off of the highway. And then there was kind of a bunch of trails that went off from this visitor center. Again, we took the James Irvine Trail to Fern Canyon. Along the way, there were, of course, tons of redwood trees, huge redwood trees, tall redwood trees. There were bridges, there were canyons, there were waterfalls, there were, bridges made out of fallen redwoods. There were destroyed, redwoods you could see that had been destroyed by fire, who knows how long ago. There were also really, really cool groupings of redwoods, and I didn't know this about redwoods, but basically when one dies for whatever reason, it kind of shoots off new redwoods. They just look like what you would think of little offshoots out of the stump, and it puts out like 5 or 6 of these things, and basically it's just trying to get one of them to survive, right? Like new life out of the dead redwood. So it puts out a bunch and hopes one survives. Well, typically like 2 to 4 actually survive, and they all grow up and create this like grouping or family of redwoods, and there's always sort of a dead one attached to it because that was the one that died. And so like these redwoods, more than likely, instead of like standing on their own, we saw so many that were grouped together like that around a dead one, and then like 2 to 4 new, quote unquote, new ones that had sprung up, beside it, but were huge. And so it's like these 4 or 5, giant redwoods, like right next to each other, growing out of like basically this one source. So that was really cool to see. The bark on the redwoods is really, really thick. It has a lot of tannin in it, and that's part of the reason these redwoods survive so long and grow so tall, is because the bark is like a couple inches thick. And it actually felt spongy to the touch. And I'm assuming that's because, it's basically a rainforest there, just a colder rainforest. It's so humid. It's right next to the ocean. It gets tons of rain. And that's why the redwoods grow so tall as well, is because they have so much rain, so much humidity all year round. And the soil is just the most beautiful, black, rich soil that you've ever seen. So they're able to grow really, really tall. They're able to repel or just prevent a lot of bugs from getting in because their bark is full of tannin and it's so thick. Same for fire. Fire is really hard to get through to it, and that's true for the sequoias as well, which are in the Sierra Nevadas. But it's really hard for these trees to actually die. So they survive a long time. They have a lot of nutrients, a lot of sun, and a lot of water, and so they grow really, really tall. So the redwoods are actually some of the tallest trees in the world. The sequoias are tall as well, but the redwoods are taller than the sequoias. The sequoias are bigger than the redwoods just in volume, kind of around plus tall. Their complete volume is bigger than the redwoods, but the redwoods are taller than the sequoias. So back to the hike. The trees, the redwood trees are actually not red on the outside. They actually changed colors during the day. So in the early afternoon, on the way, on the first part of the hike, they just look like gray, like what you would think of, clapboard housing at a beach, how it gets worn down and to that like kind of grayish color. That is what the bark of the trees look like. On the way back, when the sun was going down, it was incredible. They had this bluish purple tint. It was the coolest thing I have ever seen. It was beautiful, just the outside of the bark. The inside of the trees, what the bark is protecting, is what's red. So we could catch glimpses of that too, where the bark had peeled away or a tree had fallen. So you caught glimpses of the red, and it was a super red color, but it's not something I was expecting. I was expecting the actual trees to be red, which was interesting. The hike ended at Fern Canyon, which we had followed basically this stream the whole time, and it's where this stream came out, but it was just a trickle. The canyon is a really deep canyon, but not in the sense that you think of like the Grand Canyon or Kings Canyon, like a mountain canyon. Because it's so humid and wet there, everything is green. Everything is just green. So yes, it's a deep canyon, and there's a stream at the bottom, and that's where you walk. The trail kind of comes down, and you can walk inside the canyon. And then the sides of the canyon are covered with these ferns. It is really beautiful and a really cool sight to see. And then you can even, technically that's where the trail ends at Fern Canyon, but if you go another quarter of a mile, really you can walk down to the beach. It actually just dead ends at the ocean. And the beach right there was black sand, which I've never seen before. And there was nothing coming, there was no like silt or kind of anything washed up. If you typically go down to the beach, right, where the waves come in, there's a bunch of shells and maybe seaweed, just a bunch of stuff washing up, and there was none of that. Absolutely none of it. So it was black sand. The water was really cold, but I had to dip my fingers in and feel it. It was foggy. It was so foggy, but it was beautiful. It was like being on another planet, just because the mountains are right there and the trees are right there. The redwoods are almost right on the beach, which is not something I'm used to seeing, but it is just a really cool sight. So we got down to the beach, turned around, walked back up, saw all the same sights, but honestly, what a great hike, because it was just, you could take your time. It was never really hard. You were never out of breath. There was so much to see. There were all these flowers starting to bloom. So it was probably just one of my favorite hikes ever that I've done, and I would totally do it again. I would try and do other hikes as well. That one I think it took us maybe 4.5 hours, and then with driving, maybe like, 5 to 6 total, just because we stopped a lot to look at the trees on the trail and everything that was growing. So I actually think that was the time that we went, time of year that we went was a really great time to go. It was probably 55 to 60 degrees, which to me is perfect hiking weather. It was definitely humid and wet in the air. Sometimes it started raining, but only for, honestly, about a minute. We could see sometimes rain in other parts of the forest, and we thought it was moving towards us, and it never got to us. And that happened a couple of times, which is just wild. You can literally see rain probably 100 feet away, and you're preparing to get poured on, and it never comes. I don't know if it stops, if it's just that point. But it was just a great time of year to visit. It was beautiful on the coast. It was like a rainforest. I'm sure it's also beautiful during the spring and summer, so I wouldn't mind coming back at any time of the year. Honestly, I'm sure it would be a really fun hike. That is it for Redwoods National Park. I would love to hear questions or comments, or if you've been there and have had a different experience or the same one, you can go to my Instagram, Joy Yugi, and leave me a comment on my reel for this park. You can rate and review this podcast as well and let me know how I'm doing. And if you would rather watch than listen, you can always go to my YouTube page. Just find my name, Joy Yugi, and you can watch these episodes. Until next time, I wish you happy travels wherever life is taking you.